Welcome to today's screencast on the laws of Ikar and Tofel, deciding which bracha to make for food mixtures. I love the fact that life is so full of variety, and it's great that you can eat foods that aren't all the same thing all the same time. Of course, when you've got all of these different mixtures of foods with all of these different brachot, it does raise a pretty interesting question. Which bracha do you actually recite? And considering that you've got lots of different foods here, all mixed together, do you make one bracha on the entire dish, or do you make individual brachot for the individual food items contained in that mixture? But before we decide what you have to do, let's first make sure we understand the big idea of today's lesson. You actually have to be dealing with a food mixture or a food combination. Just because different food items are together on the same plate does not make them mixed. When we talk about a food mixture, we're talking about something that's completely different. And here the Mishnah gives us a little bit of guidance. The Mishnah teaches us, it's the seventh Mishnah in the sixth chapter of Masechet Brachot. And the Mishnah tells us as follows: Zeha klal, here's the rule for deciding which bracha to make when you've got foods that are combined together. Kol shahu ikar, if you've got something that is of primary importance, v'imo tefela, and with it you have another food that is of secondary importance. We'll define those terms some more in just a moment. Mevarich al ha'ikar, make the bracha on the ikar food, the primary one. Upoter et hatfela, and you don't need to make a bracha on the food that has secondary importance. Well, let's explore these words in a little more detail. Ikar, as we said, is the primary food, which basically means the reason why you're eating in the first place. It's the food that gives you the most nourishment or the most enjoyment. Tafel, on the other hand, is of secondary importance. It simply is eaten to add flavor or to give taste, but it's not the main reason why you're eating. Let's stop to think and make sure that we understand those terms. Read this question, go ahead and pause your screencast to think over the answer, then press play to continue. So if you answered that the Ikar item is the one that adds flavor or taste, that unfortunately is not correct. That would be the Tafel item. Let's go for some practice right now. If you look at your note-taking guides, it comes with today's lesson. Take a moment to identify whether or not the food mixtures that are listed there are actually considered to be food mixtures when it comes to the laws of Ikar and Tofel. Is it actually something that would qualify for these laws, or are they simply two items that are together on the same plate but not really mixed? Go ahead and pause the video, tackle those questions, and then when you're finished, resume the video to continue learning. So now that you've had a chance to identify whether these items are actually food mixtures or not, let's look at two laws that are important when trying to understand the topic of Ikar and Tofel in a little more detail. The first rule that you need to know, as the Mishnah told us, is that when you've got two clear items, one Ikar, a primary food, and one that is Tofel, a secondary food, the bracha on the food that is the primary food, the Ikar, counts for the bracha on the item that is Tafel. So for example, let's go back to our cereal and milk case from before. Let's say the reason why you're eating this, as most people probably are, is to feel full in the morning, get your day started for the Rabbi Hirsch show. So when you're eating the cereal and milk, you know that the item that's going to make you feel most full is the cereal, which is mizonot. Just making the bracha of mizonot would count as well for the milk item, which brings us actually to a second rule. Any leftover tafel item would require its own bracha. So if you were to go back to this case before, if the cereal, the Cheerios in this case, is the ikar, and the tafel is the milk, the Cheerios would cover your milk. Only one bracha is required, the bracha of mizonot, and you'd be fine. But what happens if you're like me and you pour too much milk in your cereal, and after you finish eating the cereal, there's still a bunch of milk remaining? Not wanting to let it go to waste, I always try to finish the milk that's in my bowl. That's what my mother told me when I was younger. Never leave your milk behind. So once you want to drink this milk, can you continue to go along with the bracha of mizonot that was pronounced at the beginning? Can that bracha still continue to cover you? That's what this law teaches. It cannot. Leftover tafel requires its own bracha. If you're going to have any leftover tafel, like the milk, in this case over here, it would require its own bracha in addition to the bracha on the mizonot that you made at first. The way I think about it is kind of like a car with those cans dragging behind it. So long as the two foods are eaten together, the bracha from the Ikar is attached to the tafel item. In other words, the fact that you made your bracha on the Ikar should cover you all the way through with your tafel item. It's like the cans getting dragged along by the car. The cans are your tafel and they get dragged along by the bracha of the Ikar. But once you cut that cord and once the cans are detached from the car and they're not together anymore, you need two separate brachot because we are now dealing with two totally separate items. Let's take a moment, stop to think and practice what we've learned so far. Take a moment and pause the video and explore this question. Tell me what you think. If you answered that this is actually true, so long as the Ikar and Tofel are eaten together, that only one bracha is required, you are correct. Well done. This brings us to two more rules that we're going to look at when it comes to the laws of Ikar and Tofel. The first of those is that when deciding which is the Ikar item, usually, as we said before, it would be the item that gives you the most nourishment or the most satisfaction. Typically, that's the item that's mizonot, because that's the one that makes you feel full. What if there's no mizonot item? Which item is then considered to be Ikar? So here we say the majority item is going to be considered Ikar when there is no mizonot food present. Take, for example, the meat and potatoes that we looked at earlier. Here you have two different foods mixed together, so far so good. It looks like an Ikar and Tofel case, but without a clear item that's the Ikar, what do you do? Of course, the bracha on the potatoes is hadama, and the bracha on the meat is shakol. If the potatoes happen to be larger in number than the meat, then the Ikar would be the potatoes. You would just make the bracha of hadama and cover the whole thing. The opposite would be true if the steak or the meat was in the majority. That would be considered your Ikar. You'd make shahakol on the whole dish and you'd cover the potatoes as well. What if the tafel item is mizonot? What do you do then? Take a look at this example, the ice cream cone. Typically when people get an ice cream cone, it's for the ice cream. They're not going to Baskin-Robbins to buy cones. However, the mizonot item, in this case the cone, is so important that you can't ignore it, even though it's the tafel item. So if the tafel item is a mizonot, in this case the cone, a separate bracha is required. You'd end up making two brachot, a bracha on the Ikar, which is your ice cream, and a bracha on the tafel, which is your cone. Even though that's the tafel item, the fact that it's mizonot still requires a bracha. Let's take a moment and stop to think about what we've just learned. Pause your video and answer the following question to yourself. So if you said that the Ikar item is the food that is smallest in number when there's no mizonot, that's not true. Remember, the Ikar item goes to the food that's in the majority, not in the minority. The food that's in the majority is considered mizonot. The food that's in the majority is considered the Ikar when there is no mizonot item present. Let's try another one. Go ahead and pause your video and try to tackle this question. So if you said that yes, you can't ignore a mizonot item even though it's the tafel, you are correct. That's our ice cream cone example. Just because mizonot is the tafel doesn't mean it gets ignored, like is what usually happens with Ikar and Tofel. You ignore the tafel. In this case, you have to make two brachot. You cannot ignore a mizonot item. It's just that important. Let's take a moment and do some more practice drills. Go ahead and pause the video, look on your note-taking guide, and decide how many brachot would you make given these situations. Would you make two brachot, or would you just make one? So we've learned a lot today about the laws of Ikar and Tofel. Let's take a moment to just review what we've learned. The Mishnah told us that whenever you have a true mixture, a true food combination, the Ikar item covers the Tofel item so long as three things are true. There's an actual food combination, both foods are eaten together. Remember that example we gave with the car and the cans. They've got to be attached to one another and eaten together. If not, the bracha of the Ikar cannot extend to the bracha of the Tofel. And finally, the Tofel item can't be mizonot. If the Tofel item is mizonot, the bracha on the Ikar does not cover it. You would need two brachot, not one. So let's go to one final brain buzz over here and think about the following two examples, which come up all the time in life: an ice cream sandwich and a cracker with hummus. Thinking about what we've learned today, would each of these items require two brachot or just one? Consider all the information that we learned in today's screencast. When you're done thinking about that, you can go ahead and make a prediction at the bottom of your note-taking guide. Remember, it's just a prediction. We'll go over the answer to that when we get to our exploration centers. Thanks so much for learning today, everybody, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you some more in class when we see each other next time.